Hey everybody, today I wanted to talk about one of my favorite albums and an album that I consider to be a hidden gem. And it is this album by Harry Nilsson, produced by John Lennon. This is the album Pussycats. And this was released in 1974. And it was recorded during John Lennon's so-called Lost Weekend, which actually the Lost Weekend turned out to be about 18 months. But there's a whole story behind why it's called the Lost Weekend and it's not called the Lost 18 Months, but we won't get into that. So anyway, this is recorded, like I said, during the Lost Weekend, and I should probably give a little bit of a backstory when it comes to Harry Nilsson and John Lennon. So Harry Nilsson, in the late 60s, put out two albums that were just some of the best albums ever, right? And they were totally Beatle-y influenced. They had a bunch of harmony vocals, and he even did a cover of the Beatles song "You Can't Do That," where he did a whole medley of other Beatles songs within that song, and it caught the attention of the Beatles press person at the time, Derek Taylor, who then went on to work for Apple Records. And Derek Taylor personally sent Nilsson's first album to John Lennon and Paul McCartney, and I think George and Ringo too. But John and Paul both flipped out over it, and during their Apple press conference in New York in 1968, when they announced Apple Records, they were asked, "Who's your favorite group?" And John Lennon said Nilsson. And then they asked Paul McCartney the same question, and he said Nilsson as well. So they were raving about Harry Nilsson, and this is basically what majorly kickstarted Harry Nilsson's career, because before that he was definitely a major recording artist, but once the Beatles mentioned him, it was his career skyrocketed. Well, then in 1968, John Lennon invited Harry Nilsson to come stay with him at his home Kenwood in England, and he also invited Nilsson to come see the Beatles recording during what at the time they were working on the White Album. So they became really good friends and stayed friends throughout the 60s and into the early 70s. And then when John Lennon was separated from Yoko Ono, he had his Lost Weekend where he started a relationship with May Pang, as I'm sure a lot of you know the story already, so I'm just repeating stuff. But anyway, John Lennon and May Pang ended up going to LA and hanging out a lot of the time with Harry Nilsson, and getting into a lot of trouble, drinking, doing drugs, the whole kind of crazy rock star thing of the 70s. Well, anyway, during these crazy times in LA, at one point John Lennon said to Harry Nilsson, "I'd like to produce your next album." And Harry Nilsson, of course, was thrilled, and they got it together. They started recording in Burbank, and the cast of characters that they got to record with them is legendary. Let me read you some of the names on the back of this album. First off, you got Ringo Starr, who was one of Nilsson's best friends as well. So Ringo's on here. Then you got Jim Keltner, who of course drummed with John Lennon and went on to drum with George Harrison, and he went on to drum for the Traveling Wilburys. So Jim Keltner is a major musician. Then you got Klaus Voormann playing bass, and of course Klaus Voormann was the artist who designed the Beatles' Revolver album cover, and he also was a musician in his own right. Played with John Lennon, played with George Harrison, played with Ringo, and now he played with Harry Nilsson here. Then you got Jesse Ed Davis, who played guitar for John Lennon, his Mind Games album, and then the Walls and Bridges album, and also played for the Concert for Bangladesh with George Harrison. So, and how can I forget? Keith Moon is also on here. Keith Moon, the wild and crazy drummer from The Who. So these sessions, or this album rather, and these sessions, had some of the craziest rock and rollers of all time playing on here. Oh, and Bobby Keys, by the way. Bobby Keys, the saxophone player who played with the Rolling Stones and just known as just a hellraiser himself. So the people that John Lennon and Harry Nilsson got to play on this, it's just legendary. And the sessions are legendary because there was so much drugs, so much alcohol, and basically most of the sessions in Los Angeles, at least, evolved into just major parties. And while all of that is very fascinating, and I'm sure you could write a whole book just about the sessions for this record. And by the way, I should mention, during the making of this record, John Lennon and Paul McCartney played together for the last time ever, because Paul and Linda were in LA and they stopped by the sessions and ended up jamming. And there's a really well-known bootleg of that jam session that exists that you can probably find on YouTube. I think it's called A Toot and a Snort, something like that, in 74. Toot and a Snore in 74, there you go. Which is referencing cocaine, of course. So, by the way, that bootleg, not very good, but interesting from a historical standpoint. But back to this record, Pussycats. So, the LA sessions were pretty crazy, so John Lennon decided that they should go to New York to the record plant, and he could control the sessions a lot better there. So they went there, they finished recording the album there. And another major thing I should point out is that Harry Nilsson ruptured a vocal cord during these recording sessions. And the rumor is that he ruptured it while he was having like a screaming contest with John Lennon, because John Lennon, of course, has an amazing scream. So Nilsson wanted to scream like John, and they had this like shouting scream contest, and it ruptured one of his vocal cords. So that left his voice very ragged and just kind of not as good as it used to be. But they finished the album, they put it out, and it didn't get much attention. But I will say this about this record. I think that it's been highly, highly remembered for the wrong reasons. I think most people remember this record now just because it's such a weird thing that John Lennon, first of all, produced another artist other than himself or Yoko Ono. He produced Harry Nilsson. And that the legendary status around these sessions as just being like absolute debauchery, hell-raising craziness. I think the songs within this album have been forgotten, and there's some amazing, amazing tracks on this record. First of all, there's an absolute Harry Nilsson masterpiece on this, the song Don't Forget Me, which has been covered by other artists, including a really amazing cover by Nico Case, which I recommend checking out. But Don't Forget Me is one of Nilsson's all-time, just absolutely one of his best songs he ever did, and that's on here. Also on this record, there's a cover of the Jimmy Cliff song, Many Rivers to Cross, which is, in my opinion, one of Nilsson's best vocal performances. His vocal on this is just so great. It absolutely just like soars throughout the track. And then there's amazing cover songs on this as well. There's also a not so amazing cover song on here, which I'll talk about in a second. But the great cover song on here is Save the Last Dance for Me, which is so good. I think it's just excellent and totally worth listening to if you haven't heard it. Another interesting cover is Rock Around the Clock. And the reason it's interesting is because it features 3 drummers playing at once on 3 different kits. Yes, 3 different drummers on 3 different kits. And the 3 drummers happen to be 3 of the best drummers of all time. Ringo Starr, Keith Moon, Jim Kellner. That alone makes that track worth listening to. And it's wild, by the way. The not so good cover, in my opinion, maybe some people out there like it, they do a cover of Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues. You know, the Johnny's in the basement, makes enough medicine, that song. And I don't know, it's been rearranged, and it just kind of seems like it was more fun to record it than it actually is to listen to it. So there's my take on that. But all in all, I think this album is highly forgotten and is really, really a really good album, and it's full of really great songs. And although Nilsson's voice was struggling at the time, I think it actually kind of works on this album because it has this ragged edge to it, and the sessions were just ragged and just kind of wild. So anyway, that's my take on the Harry Nilsson album Pussycats, produced by John Lennon. And right now, I actually just listed a copy of this album on the website needlemeetsvinyl.com. So this is my personal copy right here, but this copy, which is in its nice sleeve and it's all protected, this copy is currently on the website right now, needlemeetsvinyl.com, and it sounds excellent. It sounds better than my copy, only because this is quieter than my copy. My copy sounds just as good sonically, but it's got some surface noise. This one has a little bit of surface noise, and it's listed on the site as VG++, and I've lowered the price because of that, but it's still an excellent listening experience. And the surface noise is not bad at all, by the way, I should add. This is an original pressing on the RCA label, the orange RCA label, and it's on this like Dynaflex record, so it's kind of like thin vinyl, but this one is perfectly flat, plays great, sounds great, and yeah, so it's on the website right now, and if you want to check it out, I wrote a whole write-up about it with a lot more information on the sessions and on the songs and on the sound quality of this particular pressing. So if you want to check that out, head over there, check it out, see, maybe you read something new that you didn't know about this album. And by the way, that's another thing I wanted to bring up. My website is, obviously it's to sell records and to try to start a business, but it's also, I've tried to make it a resource page. So any album that you're interested in that you want to look up, I've written a whole lot about it. If it's on there, there's a whole write-up about the album. I wrote like a little bit of a backstory of how it was recorded, where it was recorded, some of the musicians that are featured on it, some of the key tracks. And the reason I've done it this way, and actually even when the records sell, like a lot of the records have been selling on there, but I keep up the page for that particular album because it still has the information on there. So, and the reason I did that, like about the point I was just about to get to, is because before I had a website, I would go and listen to records with my headphones on or whatever, and then on my phone or on my tablet or whatever, I would look up other people's websites where they would talk about the album. And it was fun to listen to a record and read about it at the same time. That just fascinates me. I still do that. I was doing that last night. I was listening to, I got the ZZ Top album, Eliminator, actually. It's right here, in fact. I just bought this for myself, by the way, because I don't know about ZZ Top all that much. So I wanted to check it out, listen to it. I do like it, but I was reading about it as I was listening to it. I learned a whole bunch of stuff about this album and about the band. And yeah, it's just so much fun to do. So if that's something you like to do as well, I recommend going to my website, needlebeatsvinyl.com. Check out some of the articles I've written on a bunch of the albums, and yeah, maybe you'll learn something new, or maybe you'll have something to add. So anyway, that's it for now. Let me know what you think about Harry Nilsson's album Pussycats, produced by John Lennon. Do you like it? Do you love it? Do you not care for it? I'd be very interested to know what all of you think. So that's it for now, and we'll talk to you later. Okay, goodbye.